Hello everybody! I'm here with a storytime slash League of Legends lore video. Today I want to share with you one of my favorite stories in all of League of Legends. It's a story that's filled to the brim with whimsicality and, quite honestly, makes you feel a small amount of that nostalgic childish wonder that most of us have lost touch with. The story I want to cover today is of Ivern, the Green Father. As you can see here, he's a friendly green fellow. I love his character design because it's something that's pretty unique, completely unlike a lot of the other champions in League. Sure, we have humans, eldritch horrors from beyond the veil, more humans, human-animal hybrids, demons. You can even play as a friggin' mountain. But human-plant hybrids? Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, in truth, we also have Zyra, but we'll cover her another day. My point is, his character design is pretty damn dope. Now, to understand Ivern, we first have to go back to his roots. Let's take a look at his little bio, because that's the extent of what most people know about Ivern. But he's a lot more to him, and we're going to take a look at that in a moment. Anyway, here's his bio. Ivern, known to many as Bramblefoot, or the Old Woodsman, is a peculiar half-man, half-tree who roams the wilds of Runeterra, cultivating life everywhere he goes. He knows all the secrets of the natural world and holds deep friendships with things that grow, fly, and scuttle. Ivern enriches the forest, imparts strange wisdom to any mortal he meets, and occasionally entrusts loose-lipped butterflies with his secrets. So right off the bat, if his character design wasn't obvious enough already, he's a protector of the forest. Now that alone isn't really anything special, right? All you really needed to do was take one good look at him, and you can already tell that's where his story was heading. But what I think is really interesting isn't what his place is in the world of Runeterra, but how he got there. And to find that out, we're going to have to dive a little bit deeper into Ivern's lore in order to find his origins, farther than most people care to go. And you're going to see why I think Ivern has one of the best self-contained backstories in all of League. So grab yourself some tea, and let's take a look at Ivern, the Green Father.
Live each day as if it's your first.
Ivern the Cruel was renowned as a fierce warrior in the latter days of the ancient Voriyard. His clan followed the most warlike of the old gods, and would not kneel before the upstart Three Sisters, like so many others had. However, the dark sorcery that strengthened their armies was undeniable. Ivern and his kin plotted long and hard to overthrow these hated Iceborn, eventually setting sail into the east, in search of the land where the sun first rose, from where it was said that all magic flowed into the world. If Ivern could seize such power for his own, then he could surely break any foe. As his fleet sailed over the horizon, they passed out of memory and into myth, for they were never seen in their homeland, ever again. In truth, Ivern the Cruel landed on the shores of Ionia. After cleaving through a dozen coastal settlements, he and his warriors discovered a sacred grove known as Omikayalan, the heart of the world, and there, in that strange and verdant garden, they met the fiercest resistance. Chimeric beings, half human, half beast, came at them again and again beneath the twisted branches. Undeterred, Ivern pressed on, until the battered remnants of his expedition reached what the Ionians held so sacred, the legendary God Willow. Ivern was transfixed. Even as the fighting raged around him, it was a truly colossal tree, dripping with long gossamer leaves that shimmered with golden green light. It was magic, like nothing he had ever seen before, and it was clear these inhuman creatures would die to protect it. Seeking to shatter their resolve, he took up his war axe and roared with hatred as he struck at the God Willow over and over again. The great tree fell, and in a riot of life energy, Ivern the Cruel was instantly undone. Detached, drifting, he saw the battle was over. The flesh of the fallen fed carrion birds and insects alike, or decayed under bursts of colorful mushrooms. Bones rotted into fertile soil, and seeds within it budded and sprouted into trees bearing fruit of their own. Leaves and petals pulsed like colorful hearts. From the death that surrounded him, life exploded forth in ways too numerous to believe. Never had Ivern beheld such beauty. Life, in all its forms, was tangled together like an impossible knot that didn't want to be untied. He wept, and those dewdrop tears fell upon his changed body. He was taller than he remembered, his limbs rough with bark and leaves. The magic of an entirely different world coursed through him. He did not know why or how, but he was all that now remained of the God Willow. With that realization, he heard the bawling of hills, the howling of trees, and the dripping tears of moss. He reflected on the mistakes he'd made, the cruelty he'd visited on others. Remorse washed over Ivern, and he cried out for forgiveness. When he finally moved, so much time had passed that the world felt new? The violence and sadness of his former self were mere echoes in his heart. He found he could dig his toes deep into the soil and commune with the roots, rocks, and rivers. Even the dirt itself had opinions. Ivern wandered far, across Ionia and beyond, and the strange magic of Omikayalan followed in his wake. He developed close kinships with creatures great and small, observing their foibles, delighting in their little habits, and occasionally offering a helping hand. He shortened the inchworm's path, played tricks with mischievous bramblebacks, hugged thorny elmarks, and laughed with wizened elder fungus. In one instance, he found a wounded stone golem. Knowing the poor thing's spirit was fading, he fashioned her a new heart from a river pebble, and the golem became Ivern's devoted life friend. He named her Daisy, after the flowers that mysteriously sprouted from her stone body. Sometimes Ivern encountered mortals, and many of them were at least somewhat peaceful. They called him Bramblefoot, or Greenfather, or the Old Woodsman, and told tales of his strange benevolence. But he was filled with sadness to see how they still took more than they gave, how they could be so cruel and so careless, and he retreated from their company. If he bore the God Willow's legacy, he needed to cultivate humanity, help them watch, listen, and grow. Being mortal once himself, Ivern knew this would be difficult, so he smiled and challenged himself to complete this task before the final sunset. He knew he would have time. Isn't that kind of interesting? I, for one, never would have expected to hear that this mysterious green giant was once a person, and more than that, a friggin' ruthless warrior. So there are a lot of things to unpack here, but I just wanted to clarify on one thing of note that some people who aren't too well versed in the lore of League might not be too familiar with. In the very first sentence, it states, Ivern the Cruel was renowned as a fierce warrior in the latter days of the Voriyard. Some of you might be wondering what the Voriyard means. Well, it's actually what the Freljord used to be known as. It's an old term from an old world. Alright, so that's it for Ivern's origins, but we're not done yet because we still have one short story that Riot has given us that shows us a glimpse of the life that Ivern now leads. This story is a little bit longer than Ivern's introduction, so let's just get right into it. The Gift of Venom. For most people, 100 years is a very long time. In a century, one could explore the entire world, meet thousands of people, or complete countless works of art. Now, anyone could easily assume that standing in one spot for over a century would be a colossal waste. But during that time, Ivern Bramblefoot accomplished more than any could dream. For instance, he settled a long-standing dispute between a colony of lichen and their host Boulder, helped each generation of winter squirrels find their forgotten autumn acorns, and coaxed a lone wolf to rejoin her pack, despite the fact that they once called her Howling Shrill. Ivern's toes burrowed deep into the topsoil, curled between vigilant tubers and oblivious earthworms to mingle with the roots of older trees, and the forest around him bloomed. There was much more, of course, but those examples alone are proof enough of a good century's work. Things were going swimmingly, until the Sassafras started murmuring about dark doings on the edge of the forest. "Hunters!" they cried through their roots, alarming half the forest. Ivern knew Sassafras to be anxious trees, raising their leaves in panic over the slightest stray salt snail. And after all, hunting wasn't so bad, for nothing is wasted or senseless in the cycle of life. But the Sassafras had worried the robins, who told the butterflies, and if butterflies knew a secret, so did the entire forest. So Ivern stood up, and after briefly soothing the clipper ant colony whose ancestral home he had just displaced, he stalked away, shaking off layers of crusty bark. With each flower-blooming step through the forest, the alarm grew more frantic. "3 of them!" nattered the squirrels. Eyes like twin blood moons, gibbered the scuttle crabs as they hid in the river. More bloodthirsty than Elmarks, proclaimed the Elmarks. The peregrines swore the hunters were after their eggs. The ivory-wreathed chrysanthemum feared for her lustrous petals. That worried Daisy, who loved her flowers dearly. Ivern calmed each of them and urged them to hide until trouble passed. He pretended not to notice Daisy following him, since she thought herself to be quite sneaky. He saw an 8-tusked shagyak dead in the grass. 3 arrows were thrust deep into the thick hump of muscle at the base of its neck. As a sappy tear escaped Ivern's eye, a squirrel he'd named Micus scampered up the Greenfather's chest and lapped it off his cheek in solace.
Hunters take meat for food,
Ivern said aloud.
Hunters whittle bone into toys and tools. Hunters sew pelts into garments and tan skin into boots.
The corpse was missing its 8 shimmering pearlescent tusks. Ivern touched the ground, and a circle of daisies bloomed around the dead shagyak. He saw a baby stone-scale viper slithering away. Stone-scale vipers are wise beyond their years. Safe? The snake hissed. Ivern knew snakes were embarrassed by their lisps, and for a long time had avoided words with sibilant sounds. He challenged them to embrace the words they feared the most, but they took the lesson to heart, and now spoke exclusively in words beginning with S. Snakes. Such overachievers.
It's safe now, little one.
Poor thing must have witnessed the whole ordeal.
Coil up here and watch the shagyak for me.
Ivern urged the baby viper.
I'll return once I get to the bottom of this.
The shagyak horns clacked relentlessly with each step Rizbel took, so much that she had to stop and repack the tusks lest the noise scare off their next kill. Upriver, those horns would earn them a fortune. City people paid well for half-cocked backwater remedies these days. Nico, the square-jawed hunter with one eye, uncovered another set of shagyak hoofprints. She beckoned behind her to Ito, the rich city man with a whalebone bow, and grinned. Ito's toothy smile and malicious eyes made Rizbel, the youngest of the crew, shiver. Up ahead, in a glade, another 8-tusked shagyak grazed on its very favorite variety of grass. Each of the 3 hunters approached slowly and quietly, rustling nary a dead leaf. In rehearsed synchronicity, all 3 readied their bows and took careful aim. The shagyak's head was still bent low as it dined on the soft molderberries and scully grass, obscuring the knot of muscles at the base of its neck. When pierced, the hump would keep the blood flowing while the hunters hewed off the horns. It was very important that the shagyak still be alive when the tusks were harvested to increase their potency, Ito said. Sweat beaded down her neck as she waited for the shagyak to raise its head. Just as the beast's head swung up, the glade of low scully grass bloomed impossibly fast, from ankle height to over their heads in a moment. The stalks stretched towards the sun, flowers blooming instantly in an array of radiant petals. A flowering wall of scully grass completely obscured the shagyak. Ito dropped his bow. Nico's one good eye looked as if it was going to bulge from its socket. Rizbel's arrow errantly soared through the air. She didn't command her fingers to release the bowstring. She backed up against the nearest tree, terrified. I told you these woods were cursed, Rizbel whispered. We should leave now. I've dealt with this sorcery before, Nico said. I will do this the old way. She placed her arrow back in her quiver and pulled a long, mean-looking dagger from her belt. Edo did the same. They both beckoned for Rizbel to stay put with the tusks as they stealthily disappeared into the wall of grass. She waited and held her breath, but couldn't even hear their footfalls. One day she hoped to be as silently deadly as her companions. Still, she couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that the wall of vegetation was a warning to be heeded. Stories her grandmother told her of the strange creatures of magic that wandered this world came back to her. Just children's tales, she reminded herself. An eerie and unfamiliar sound echoed through the glade. It wasn't the shrieking of a shagyak, but the heavy sound of rocks smashing into ground with loud, splintery thuds. Whatever caused the sound, it was enough to make Edo and Nico race out of the brush, running at full tilt. Their skin was pale, and their eyes were wide. Then, she saw what had caused her companions to flee. A flower. A simple, ivory-wreathed chrysanthemum was dancing on top of the grass. It was a rather curious sight. Then, Rizbel realized it was getting closer. The grass parted, and there stood a behemoth of stone and moss, a living incarnation of granite, massively strong and moving with rhythm. In the moment it took Risbel to reconcile what was happening, she heard a calm voice calling to the creature.
Daisy, be careful and gentle.
Risbel grabbed a satchel of tusks and ran after Nico and Edo, trying to remember the route that led back to their camp. At each tree, a new wall of grass sprouted up. Something stalked within the grass, rustling through the leaves as it walked, giggling as Risbel spun in circles trying to find her way out. She was alone in a strange forest, and behind every infernal tree lurked more grass, springing up nearly instantly. Risbel realized she was being corralled the same way her grandmother used to herd sheep. Knowing full well that she was walking into a trap, Risbel squared her shoulders and followed the grass. Ivern watched as the young hunter stepped out of the grassy maze and approached the shagyak's body. The poor thing looked positively terrified. She clearly had never seen anything or anyone quite like himself before. He tried to be gentle, but humans tended to be so individual in their reactions, unlike, say, the caterwauling of smug mewlarks.
Please, don't be frightened, unless that is your natural state, in which case, right away. I'll wait. I really don't mind.
It wasn't Ivern's intention to frighten anyone, but no one can account for another being's experience. Get on with it, Risbel said. Her voice quavered and her eyes flinched. I've trespassed, I know. I'm at your mercy. Just let it be quick. Be quick? Ivern shrugged.
Certainly. It didn't cross my mind that you might have better places to be. Very well then.
The girl closed her eyes and lifted her chin, exposing her throat. She reached her hand back toward the scabbard at her belt and wrapped her knuckles around the dagger. If he came for her, it would be a surprise.
But I only want to know why,
Ivern said, in a voice filled with merriment. He gestured with his branch-like fingers to the shagyak's body. His arm stretched longer than it should, to the dead beast's back where he lovingly stroked its blood-mottled fur. Risbel drew her dagger and then felt a sharp pain in her ankle. A cold sensation spread up her leg. When she looked down, she saw the culprit, a stone-scaled viper, the most venomous asp in all the alderwood. Out of anger and instinct, she lashed out at the snake.
No!
Ivern shouted. A viney root sprouted up from the soil and caught her arm, preventing her strike. They wrapped around her wrists and ankles and knees. She dropped her dagger and struggled to break free. I'm going to die, she cried. The venom's coldness spread up past her knee. The serpent slithered to Ivern's feet and coiled up the outside of his leg, climbing up and around his body until it vanished into his armpit. It emerged from the back of his head, curling around one of the branches, and licked its forked tongue at Ivern's ear. Sorry, hissed the snake to Ivern. Startled. Please, Risbel said. Help me.
Ah, yes.
His honey eyes twinkled with an idea.
There's one thing that loves shagyaks, especially dead ones. And please forgive Cyrus. He's only recently hatched and doesn't know how to control his venom. Gave you a full dose, I'm afraid. He asked me to tell you that he's awfully sorry. You startled him, and he reacted purely on instinct. Now, watch.
The tree man knelt before the shagyak's body, closed his eyes, and hummed a deep, earthy tune. His hands were in the soil, fingers splayed out. Twinkling green pops of light cascaded from his rune-carved head, down his arms and into the dirt. Odd purple mushrooms popped up from the carcass. They were tiny at first. Then, their stalks rose as rot overtook the shagyak's corpse. Soon, there was only fur, bones, and an army of violet mushrooms.
Ah, sting salt fungus.
Ivern sighed. He plucked one delicately.
Always so punctual.
The vines retracted from Risbel's body. She collapsed in a heap. Her hands immediately shot to her heart. The icy pangs of stone-scale venom had reached her chest.
Eat this,
Ivern said, offered the purple mushroom to the dying woman.
It might not taste like salamander dew or sunshine, but it's not as bad as Lippertick apples.
Risbel had no idea what the strange tree man was on about, but her options were so severely limited at that moment, a voice came back to her from the past, her grandmother's. Trust in nature. The Green Father never leads you astray. She grabbed the mushroom from Ivern's hand. It tasted like bitter tea and mulch, a disappointing final meal. Then, the icy grip around her heart thawed and retreated. Within minutes, her legs worked again. As she recovered, Ivern made her a tincture of odd leaves, tree sap, and water from a spring he discovered with his toes. He served it to her in a bird's nest cup that a peregrine dropped into his hand. "You're him, aren't you? The Green Father." Ivern shrugged as if he didn't know.
You know what we could do here?
He said, turning his attention to the Shagyak bones.
Moss always loved to pretty up the place.
As soon as he said it, a thick carpet of moss crept over the bones. With the mushrooms, what once had been a grisly sight was now beautiful.
Sheldon would love how beautiful his bones turned out to be. Badgers will use his ribs as shelter from the autumn storms. Nothing is ever wasted.
Ivern said, turning his attention to Risbel.
It seems so senseless, but it makes perfect sense. If it wasn't killed, you wouldn't have lived.
"We wanted its tusks," Risbel said. She fixed her eyes on her boots in shame. "Rich people clamor for them, willing to pay a lot."
I remember money. It's rarely a good motivator.
"I knew we shouldn't have killed it. My grandmother used to tell me that if one must kill, one must use all parts to honor the beast."
I would have loved to meet your grandmother.
Ivern said. "She has gone to the ground."
Returning to the soil that which the soil gave is noble.
"I'm sorry," Risbel said after a long moment of silence.
All life is precious.
The gentleness and warmth and forgiveness in Ivern's voice moved Risbel to tears. Ivern patted her on the head.
I probably couldn't have handled the whole thing better myself. I've so much to remember about humans, and so much too I had forgotten to ever learn.
Ivern helped Risbel to her feet.
I must be off now. I promised the tadpoles of Southern Pond that I would monitor their elections for the King of Lilypads. It's quite the contentious race.
A while later, Risbel emerged from the tree line near the river. After gulping down some water, she dug a hole in the banks and tenderly placed the Shagyak tusks inside. She scooped up a handful of dirt and recited the prayers of honor her grandmother had taught her. She repeated this ritual until the horns were buried. Then she bowed her head in reverence and left the site marked as a grave. From the depths of the alderwood, Ivern smiled at the gesture. The Shagyak herd would be proud. Wow, I love this story. I sincerely hope that I did a good job trying to tell the story of Ivern and that it resonated with you the same way that it resonated with me. I mean, I know that I just read you the story, you just listened to me tell you the story, but if you found it even a little bit interesting, I really do encourage you to please go and read the story for yourself. It just has this nice bedtime story feel to it, and I love it for that. Anyway, just go ahead and let me know in the comments below what you thought about this story, if you thought it was cool, if you thought it was lame. I don't know. I just want to hear your thoughts. It would really mean a lot to me. But more than anything else, I just really appreciate that if you're listening to this video up until this point in time, that means more to me than you will ever know. And I sincerely hope that you'll stick around, possibly even subscribe, just so that you can go ahead and listen to more stories, whether they be League of Legends related or just me reading some folklore stories. Anyway, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I hope that I made your day a little bit better. Until next time, bye.